Hey, friends, this is Michael Brown, and you are joining us for a very special edition of The Line of Fire. I'm speaking with Catholic scholar and author E. Michael Jones. He holds a PhD from Temple University in American literature. And in a piece that is very hostile to him, published by the ADL, he's described as a Catholic writer who seeks to defend traditional Catholic teachings and values from those he perceives as seeking to undermine them. I believe Dr. Jones would affirm that. It also calls him an anti Semitic Catholic writer who promotes the view that Jews are dedicated to propagating and perpetrating attacks on the Catholic Church and moral standards, social stability, and political order throughout the world. So I want you to know that Dr. Jones and I will speak respectfully to each other as fellow scholars. In fact, I had appreciated some of his earlier work from the 90s, sharing certain burdens about culture wars, etc. We're going to speak to each other with respect, but we have committed to be utterly candid. So we're going to be as candid and forthright as possible, but don't be uncomfortable with it. That's why we're doing the show, to put issues on the table. Is what Dr. Jones is saying anti-Semitic? Is he onto something important? Am I wrongly defending Jewish people, or only going so far in my criticism? One other thing before I introduce Dr. Jones is that I absolutely affirm valid criticism of Jewish people and the state of Israel. I've often bemoaned the fact that Tel Aviv is the world's #1 gay-friendly city. I've spoken plainly about issues of Jewish atheists or cultural revolutionaries, the Karl Marxists and things like that. So I've no problem with what I understand to be legitimate criticism of the Jewish people. I do think there's something validly called anti-Semitism. So we're going to talk about that. And then also, if at the end of this, Dr. Jones says, well, there's more to say and I didn't get an opportunity to say it, I'd be very happy to join him on something where he hosts me, or to have a formal, moderated academic debate where we could spend a few hours laying things out, cross-examining each other, because in the midst of our differences, I want to be as fair as possible. So, Dr. Jones, thanks so much for immediately consenting to our invitation to join us on the air.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, Dr. Jones, how do you respond to the idea that you are anti-Semitic?
Well, I go back to the origin of the term. The term was created by Wilhelm Marr in 1871 in a book that he wrote about the situation in Germany at that time. Marr was a revolutionary from the Revolution of 1848. He felt that the Jews in Hamburg betrayed the revolution. He still had that animus toward Christianity that those revolutionaries had. He needed a new way to talk about Jewish involvement in the culture. And so he came up with the term anti-Semitism, which is a racial term. This is a time when racial thinking was at a high point. Biological determinism was on the rise at this point. Darwin was a big topic of discussion. And basically, he said that Jewish behavior was a function of Jewish biology, Jewish DNA, if you want to put it that way. I categorically reject that position. That's why I am not an anti-Semite. That's what the word anti-Semitism means. Now, over the period of time since then, it has taken on the meaning which it has today, which is basically an anti-Semite used to be someone who didn't like Jews, and now it's someone Jews don't like. So the state of art description, I would say right now, is anyone who criticizes Jews is an anti-Semite.
All right. So
it's called an anti-Semite, even if the criticism is saying exactly the same thing that a Jew said. So,
right.
For example, the classic example I give is Jews are behind gay marriage. Is it anti-Semitic to say that? Well, it's anti-Semitic if I say it, but when Amy Dean says it in Tikkun magazine, no, that's kind of praise for the Jews. So I think this is the problem, and I'm grateful for you for allowing me to come on and talk about this, because I think it's a big problem that we have to deal with.
Right. So I fully agree that there can be an overuse of the term anti-Semitism. I fully agree that sometimes the rule can be, well, I'm a Jew, I can say it about my people, but someone else can't. And look, we know certain things in terms of cultural humor. You can crack jokes about your own people and et cetera. You within the Catholic Church might speak more freely than me as a non-Catholic. But what I would want to challenge and push back on it, and then get your response to, is the idea that anti-Semitism, to be valid, has to be racial. To me, if you demonize a people as a whole, if you can speak about the Jews, and the Jews, whether it's by nature or by religion or by a freak of historical development, the Jews as a whole are kind of demonized and spoken of in a certain way. There is a Jewish problem. Then to me, that becomes anti Semitic. Now there are stereotypes, now there are exaggerations, now you're painting with too broad a brush. Encyclopedia Britannica describes anti Semitism as hostility toward or discrimination against Jews as a religious or racial group. And what I've often heard and seen is people talk about the Jews, as if it is this monolithic group, and the Jews are responsible for all these evils in the world. So, do you believe there is a Jewish problem, or the Jews as a group are especially evil?
I believe that the term the Jews does refer to a group, and that we have to be able to use this term if we want to address the contemporary situation. I've said this before, but I gave the example of every year the Germans pay the Jews reparations payments. This is a true statement. It's based on two facts. The first fact, that there is such a group as the Germans, which writes the check, and there is such a group as the Jews, which cashes the check. Okay? That does not mean that every single Jew or every single German is involved in this transaction. We're talking about political entities here. Okay? But we have to be able to talk about these political entities if we're going to make sense of the contemporary world. Now, I take this back. I mean, as you pointed out, I'm a Catholic, which means that I follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, and these teachings are expounded in books called the Gospels. And the Gospel of St. John uses the word the Jews, hoi Judeoi in Greek, 71 times. Okay, there is a definite group there called the Jews. This is the Jewish people, the political entity, however you want to describe it. Does that mean that every single Jew is involved in this political entity? Well, no, it doesn't mean that. As a Christian, I have to accept the scriptures as normative. St. Paul in 1 Thessalonians 2 says the Jews are the people that killed Christ, and they are enemies of the entire human race. I have to accept that as a Christian. I have to accept the fact that there is such a group called the Jews. I have to accept the fact that at this period of time, there were Jews who accepted Jesus Christ as the Messiah, and there were Jews who rejected him. Those Jews who accepted Jesus Christ as the Messiah did not call for his crucifixion. The Blessed Mother did not yell, "Crucify him." So they were obviously Jews from a biological point of view, but they were not part of a group that you would call the Jews. And so if we can make that type of distinction, I think we can proceed to talk about the issues that have recurred in history as a result of that.
All right, so let me respond to the usage in John's Gospel of hoi Judeoi and the Jews there, and also First Thessalonians, the second chapter. I'm sure with your scholarship, you're quite aware, and top Catholic scholars would verify this, that the term the Jews in Greek could speak of at least three different classes of people. It could speak of the Jewish people as a whole. It could speak of the Judeans, so the Jews living in Judah, or it could speak of Jewish leadership. And this is widely recognized. In fact, quite a few modern translations make adjustments there to indicate that we're talking about Judeans or Judean leaders, because we know, for example, in Matthew, the 21st chapter, when Jesus gave the parable of the vineyard, that he explicitly, Matthew says that the leaders knew he was speaking about them, because the people, the Jewish people, thought that he was a prophet. So the crowds that were thronging, they thought he was a prophet. Also, if you read First Thessalonians chapter 2, beginning verse 14 in Greek, here I'll read from New King James, which is hardly meant to be avant-garde or creative. "For you, brethren, became imitators of the churches of God, which are in Judea, in Christ Jesus. For you also suffered the same things from your own countrymen, just as they did from the Judeans, who killed both the Lord Jesus and their own prophets." So it's speaking about a certain group of people in Judah, Jewish leaders, who historically had opposed prophets, opposed Jesus, and they were the ones hostile to all mankind, as opposed to the Jews killed Jesus, and the Jews are hostile to all mankind because certainly, historically, that's been used to persecute Jews and discriminate against Jews through the centuries. I have many friends of mine growing up, they came home from school crying, "Mommy, who's Christ? The other boys say that I killed Christ." So surely you know how that phrase has been used for to perpetuate Jewish bloodshed through the centuries. The Jews are Christ killers, but you seem to be affirming that statement.
The Jews killed Christ. Yeah, I am affirming that statement.
Well, the
I
Jews
think it's,
followed Christ. Can you affirm that?
of course, I can.
Oh,
Let me back up here.
yeah.
I'll give you the framework of the Jewish revolutionary spirit. Okay, the Messiah comes. The Jew is a theological construct. That's the thesis of this book. Okay, the Messiah comes. The Messiah is not going to force the free will of the Jews to accept him. They have to accept him freely and accept him on his terms. The Jews who accepted Jesus Christ, okay, are known as the Catholic Church. They're called Christians. Okay, the Jews who rejected Jesus Christ are known as Jews. And that group has perdured throughout history to this day. I'm saying there is a group called the Jews. Okay, what I'm saying here is that in rejecting Jesus Christ and killing him, the Jews rejected the Logos. St. John calls God the Logos. Jesus Christ is the Logos incarnate. When you reject the Logos, you're rejecting the order of the universe. You're rejecting rationality. When you reject the order of the universe, you become a revolutionary. And I'm saying that's been the identity of the Jew ever since that time up to this day.
All right, so here's what we need to pursue. I know the Logos theology is very important to you. We've just got a minute before the break. I'm speaking with Dr. E. Michael Jones. The book you referenced, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. Actually, I bought the book and was reading it and was learning certain things because I was looking for certain history and I was looking about communism and music and things and found some references there. Then read more and thought, oh boy, I differ very strongly here. So we want to pursue this, but I want to give Dr. Jones time to unpack what he's saying. Obviously, I would take strong issue with when we keep talking about the Jews, because you've got religious Jews, you've got secular Jews, you've got Jews every point between. When you talk about the Jews in gay marriage, certainly there are Jewish activists and liberals highly involved in this, and in the SPLC and the ACLU and these liberal groups that I stand against. You've got the George Soroses of the world. Then you've got conservative Jewish voices fighting against those values. We'll be right back. I am speaking with Dr. E. Michael Jones, author of The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit and many other books. He is a Catholic scholar. He stands strongly for Catholic traditionalism and traditional moral values. And he feels that the Jews are responsible for much of the evil in the world today, be it pornography, be it gay, quote, marriage, and the like. And we have certain points that we agree on and other points where we strongly differ. So I so appreciate Dr. Jones being willing to come on and have an honest discussion. Let me say again, if you're just tuning in, we are candidly airing differences. Neither is going to be taking personal offense or being put on the defensive. We believe things deeply. We've researched things. We have convictions. And that's why we're having this discussion. So, Dr. Jones, you were saying that based on John 1, where John describes Jesus as the Logos beginning in verse 1 and then up through verse 14 describes him in those terms, that this is the wisdom of God, the mind of God, the rationality, and the Jewish people as a people rejecting that have thereby rejected the will of God, plan of God, and as a people have become revolutionaries. Is that a fair summary of your thesis? And then you could expand on that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary. I'm saying that Jewish identity is now bound up with the rejection of Logos. And the rejection of Logos leads to this propensity to get involved in revolutionary movements. And the book, Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, is about Jewish involvement in revolutionary movements, beginning with the rebellion against Rome, the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, then the Simon Bar Kokhba rebellion, another rebellion against Rome, the support of the Aryan crisis. This, in many ways, it's not my thesis. Louis Israel Newman wrote a book, and I forget the title of the book, but I mean, basically, he said that there's not one revolutionary movement in Europe that hasn't been supported by the Jews. So that was what I'm trying to implement or trying to explain in this book. I'm saying that you can't understand it politically. I was involved with dialoguing with Jews. Some of my biggest supporters were Jews. Rabbi Sam Dresner was a big supporter of mine, and we both were against the sexualization of the culture and so on and so forth. But then we come up to 2003, and there are all these people who are calling themselves conservatives, like Irving Kristol, the neoconservative movement. And I'm thinking, well, I'm a conservative and he's a conservative. Well, but wait a minute, what does this mean? In the 1930s, Irving Kristol was a Trotskyite. Now he's calling himself a conservative. What do these things have in common? Well, like the Iraqi war, perpetual war, all these type of things that cannot be explained simply on a political basis. You have to go deeper than politics. And that's why I went to the Gospel of St. John and the notion of logos and rebellion against logos as the only thing that explains Jewish identity, no matter what your political orientation.
Yeah, so here's where I agree and here's where I strongly disagree, sir. I agree in that you must look beyond just a political, historical explanation for these things. And I do believe that there is a special calling on the Jewish people to have world impact, to be a light to the world. When we get things right, we have tremendous positive impact. When we get things wrong, we have tremendous negative impact. So I would agree that we have a disproportionate influence. But here's where I differ. Having been raised in a Jewish home, having interacted with my Jewish people now as a follower of Jesus for 47 years, I'm 100% sure, having interacted with the religious Jewish community for decades and hundreds and thousands of hours, that the last thing in the mind of a traditional Jew is a battle with Catholicism or trying to push away from Catholicism or disprove it or anything like that. In fact, your average traditional Jew doesn't think about Jesus more than your average traditional Christian thinks about Buddha, maybe even less so. Not only so, the ones that tend to be the cultural revolutionaries, be it the Allen Ginsbergs of the 1960s or the George Soroses of today, are the ones who've cast off traditional Judaism, and that your average traditional Jew wants to be left to himself and his own community to study Torah and to raise a Torah observant family. And they're praying for the coming of Messiah is not based on we want to have our Messiah to prove Jesus isn't the Messiah, but rather because they believe in his coming and that he'll fulfill the promises of Scripture, which they read daily and pray for daily. So I unless there is a demonizing of the people as a whole, the Jews, I would have to make very clear distinctions between traditional Jews and non-traditional Jews and why people do what they do. And then I would no longer talk about the Jews. I might talk about secular Jews or liberal Jews, or I make qualifications. But fundamentally, when I'm hearing about the Jews and you're putting them all in one group, I'll say this last thing. There's an article that I read written by a Jew, a Jewish professor, that I'd seen cited by one of your authors on Culture Wars, explaining Jewish involvement in pornography. And one guy saying it was our way of basically saying, blank you to the Catholic Church and to traditional society. But then there are others saying this was our way of pushing against Torah and throwing off traditional Judaism. So I again say painting with such a broad brush has been part of what's led to so much bloodshed and suffering in Jewish history.
Yeah, well, you're questioning whether there is such a category as the Jews. It's like a semantic argument here. I was in Iran. I was in Mashhad, and we were doing a conference. And the scene behind us was very dramatic because they have big TV screen, and as we're talking, we're watching Israeli snipers gun down Palestinians as they're marching toward the wall. And I said at this point, one of the people at the conference was Rabbi David Weiss, who was part of Neturei Karta. So I said at the conference, I said, if all of the Jews were like Rabbi David Weiss, we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't have this problem. But unfortunately, they're not all like that. Okay. And the fact of the matter is that the reason you people, I'm referring to the Iranians, the reason you don't have a nuclear agreement is because of three rich Jews, Sheldon Adelson, Bernard Marcus, and Paul Singer. Basically destroyed this agreement that the Obama administration had created. So in dealing with this, in a sense, I've already dealt with this in a biblical perspective, from the biblical perspective, by saying that when at the time of Jesus Christ, at the time of the crucifixions, it was the Jews who killed Christ, if by that we mean the Jewish people, because they were an organized body of people. And they said his blood be on us and on our children. And it was ratified. So there were Jewish leaders and there were Jewish followers who did it. That does not mean that, as I said, every Jew was involved in this.
But
Same thing is true.
Just to jump in though, there were Jewish leaders that turned Jesus over to be crucified. And the New Testament verifies that. It says, you with the help of wicked men put him to death. And there was a Jewish crowd that said, yeah, we take responsibility. Let the guilt be on us and on our children. That does not curse all Jews through history, nor does that make all Jews responsible through history, nor does it make the Jewish people as a whole at that time responsible. And that's why the book of Acts talks about tens of thousands of Jews who followed Jesus. And that's why, look, if you want to say each generation of Jewish people that rejects Jesus is responsible for that rejection, I agree. I believe Jews need Jesus to be saved. So that's a very strong statement. Jews without Jesus, I believe, are lost. I can be called anti-Semitic for saying that. That's fine. I'll take that. But when you keep referring to the Jews, you forget the fact that all the first followers were Jews, that the ones that made this message known to the world were Jews, and that this was just an inter-Jewish conflict at the beginning.
It was an inter-Jewish conflict. That's what I'm saying. I've also mentioned that the story of the man born blind, the parents of the man born blind. The statement in the gospel is the parents of the man born blind refused to speak out of fear of the Jews, because the Jews threatened to expel from the synagogue anyone who accepted Jesus Christ as the Messiah. Well, obviously, the parents of the man born blind were biologically Jews. Everybody was a Jew in that story. Well, why does the writer of that gospel refer to fear of the Jews then? Because the identity of the Jew became different at that point. The identity of the Jew became a rejecter of Logos. And the Jewish people became the vehicle of that rejection of Logos in history. I don't know how I can make it any clearer than what I'm saying right now.
All right. So two things, and then you'll have ample time. We're coming up towards a break. So if you don't get full time to respond now and I have to jump in, you'll have full time and we respond. Okay. Number one, that's the whole point. It shouldn't be translated the Jews. It should be translated the Jewish leaders or the Judeans.
Can I stop for a second?
Yeah.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yeah.
Who are you to say to the evangelists how they're supposed to use those words?
Because it's self-evident.
I'm not talking about translations. I'm talking about the word hoi Judeoi, which means the Jews. I'm going back to the Greek. That's not a translation. There is a group called the Jews, and the gospel identifies who they are.
All right, so here's who I am to differ. I have a PhD in Near Eastern languages and literatures. I've written commentaries on biblical books, and I can document top Greek scholars, top Catholic scholars who say it is a misnomer to say it must be translated the Jews. I'll gladly email you documentation from top Catholic scholars who have even written whole books focusing on that subject. The fact that those people were Jews, the fact that Paul and others in Acts 21, it talks about how many Jews there are who are following Jesus, okay? The term is not just a term of approbation, all right? And Paul is happy to identify himself as among that people and reaffirm God's promises to that people. So the very account tells you to translate the Jews as misleading because the parents were Jews and everyone knows they were Jews. So it is the Judean leaders That the Jewish leaders, that's the one where the issue is. All right, you get to rebut, you get to come back on the other side of the break. Hey, friends, I'm speaking with Catholic scholar Dr. E. Michael Jones, author of many books. The one perhaps we can focus on the most here is The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. So we have areas in common and areas of strong disagreement. We've been going back and forth about the meaning of the word the Jews or Jews in the Gospels, in the New Testament, how it should be translated. And I've made some statements. Just wanted to go back to you, Dr. Jones. I know you're ready to move on, but I'll give it back to you. You can go up from here and then move on to maybe a historical point or perhaps answer my question about when you talk about the Jews, you have religious Jews, secular Jews. Aren't you grouping everyone together unnecessarily?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's the fact that I started off 40 years ago to become a professor and then got expelled from the academy. I got fired from a Catholic college for being against abortion, that I'm a little bit skeptical about scholarly opinion. I mean, scholarly opinion is influenced by the times, and we have a certain period we're living in right now where it's not polite people do not say the word Jew. It's very clear. So we're breaking that taboo by talking about it today, but that still is the taboo. The fact of the matter is that the word is hoi judaioi. It's the Jews. It's the Jews. Let's not make it more complicated than it is. You can say Jewish leaders. Okay, that's true, but Jewish leaders are only Jewish leaders if they have Jewish followers. And you put Jewish leaders and Jewish followers together, and you have the Jewish people. And the Jewish people have an identity that is not political, it's not racial, it is theological. And the theological identity is rejection of Logos. And I'm saying that's true of the people who follow the Talmud, all the way over to Trotsky and the people who hated the Talmud. So it's true. The one common denominator, I think, is the Jewish revolutionary spirit. And that's why I wrote that book.
All right. So sir, if you are saying it's not racial, you are saying that it's not biological, but somehow it is a spiritual trait of all Jewish people worldwide.
Yes.
Okay. So that to me would be anti-Semitism. In other words, that is a broad characterization. You're saying it's not racial, but it's basically inborn spiritually. So it's not much of a difference. And unless that Jew is a follower of Jesus, they would be part of that evil group, the Jews, who you could make the statement, the Jews are hostile to all mankind, and you don't have any problem making that broad statement.
No, I'm saying what we're talking about is a philosophical issue here of whether this category, is there an identity to the Jewish people? Right now, if you say there is an identity to the Jewish people, you're called an anti-Semite. This is why this situation has become intolerable here. Okay, this is not anti-Semitism to say that there is a group called the Jews and they have an identity that can be traced to one common characteristic. That's not anti-Semitism.
Right, but you're saying that someone that completely rejects traditional Judaism, someone that could care less about Jesus, God, tradition, anything, that they are infested with this evil attitude just as much as a traditional Jew praying daily and seeking to live a moral life, and that would abhor many of the same cultural things that you and I abhor, many of the developments that, but it's like almost in the, it's just as much it's in the blood, which to me
No,
is a
no,
very
wait a minute. Don't bring up blood here. I'm not
okay,
talking
in the
about
spirit, in the spirit of a Jew.
I'm saying that rejection of Logos is the Jewish identity. It's a negative identity. It's rejection of Logos. It's not fatal. You're not determined to do this. If you accept, Jews accept Logos in all sorts of variations. Okay. If you want to completely reject the rejection of Logos, then baptism is a good way to do it. But there are all kinds of Jews. I mean, the fact that we're speaking here is a sign that we're using Logos. There are different gradations. I'm saying that the one thing that unifies someone like Trotsky and Irving Kristol is rejection of Logos. They were on opposite ends of the political spectrum. They were on the same side for a while, then they were on opposite sides. The one thing that unites them is a rejection of Logos. That's my point.
Right. And I understand that. So again, Paul, speaking of his Jewish people, Romans 3, what advantage then is in there being a Jew? This is after his people as a nation had rejected the Messiah, the leaders in particular had done so. He said, much advantage in every way because the oracles of God were committed to them. So Jews still study scripture on a daily basis, and Jews still pray to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob on a daily basis. And traditional Jews would affirm many of the same moral values that we would affirm based on the Hebrew scriptures. So your theology of Logos goes far beyond what John's point is. And look, obviously you differ with translators who say the word. So you're differing with pretty much all English translators, or the vast majority, saying that that's narrowing the meaning there. I could push back and say you need to look at the Aramaic word memra, word, which is even more likely the base of John's theology in the first chapter, which is simply God's way of communicating with men and interacting with men. But I had on the air yesterday with me, I don't know when this will air, but yesterday as we're recording, David Horowitz, who's a secular Jew, an agnostic. And in terms of social issues, and in terms of liberal Jews being on the wrong end of social issues, he'd be step for step with you and with me on so many of these points. But in your mind, because he's not a follower of Jesus, he's still inherently evil, inherently
Wait a minute.
hostile.
Stop. I never said anyone was inherently evil. So please don't put these words in my mouth.
Okay, please. I apologize. So would you say that Jews by nature as a people, we're not saying biology, but by spiritual nature, are by nature subversive people and by nature hostile to all mankind?
I am saying that yes, I am saying
That's not evil. Being hostile to all mankind and subversive is not evil.
Well, first of all, I have to say that because St. Paul said it. He said the Jews are enemies of the entire human race. They are. The question is, why are they enemies of the entire human race? Because they killed Christ, and in killing Christ, they rejected Logos. And when you reject Logos, you become a revolutionary. And that's what Jews have been for 2,000 years. That's the thesis of the book. So to get back to David Horowitz, I really liked his notes of a native son, where he was honest about being raised as a communist red diaper baby in New York in the 1930s. But we're talking about the same thing as Irving Kristol. It's just Irving Kristol in a younger version. He went from the left wing to the right wing. Now he's a neoconservative. Now he's a flaming supporter of Israel and that type of injustice. So there's a constant here that needs to be explained and can only be explained by a broader category like Logos. You can't explain it along political lines.
Got it. But what I don't understand, and of course I strongly differ with your reading of 1 Thessalonians 2 and what you deduced from it, but please help me to understand this, and then I want to probe a little deeper through history, sir. And I really appreciate you coming on, because again, you knew up front we'd be differing, and if you feel anything's been unfair here, I will gladly join you on your turf, where you can moderate the mic, or a formal academic debate, which I think we could conduct ourselves in properly. But please help me understand this. You really took umbrage to the idea that Jews are inherently evil, but you say that Jews are inherently subversive and hostile to all mankind. Isn't that evil?
Now, what do you mean by inherently? There is nothing inherent about this. This is a choice that every Jew makes throughout history. Every Jew, at a certain point, you're raised in a particular group, and then you wake up to the situation where you're conscious of what this group stands for. And at that point, you have to make a choice. Am I going to be for Logos or against Logos? Israel Shamir is an example of what I'm talking about. Israel Shamir was in the IDF during the 67 war. The artillery barrage is starting to come in. He's in a foxhole, and suddenly has this epiphany where, wait a minute, this is big Jews moving little Jews around on a chessboard for reasons that I can't understand. This makes no sense to me. I'm out of here. And he stopped being a Jew. He became a Christian at that point. Gilad Atzmon had a similar epiphany. He has not become a Christian, but he awoke to the fact that he was, what are we talking about here? You're part of an organization that is at odds with Logos. I don't know how more basically I can say it. Jews throughout history, there is nothing inherent there is nothing deterministic about what I'm saying. It is a free choice that every single Jew has to make as soon as he understands enough about the situation he's in, the group he belongs to, and what the alternatives are.
Right. So having been part of that group for 64 years and interacted with that group for countless hundreds of thousands of hours, I tell you that your perception from the outside is not a true one. And you may have a testimony of a person here or there. But I might as well just tell you that the reason that the Pope wears a yarmulke is because he's a secret Jew, and the reason that they wear robes is because secretly they all want to be women. I could make that outsider statement and really believe it. But in your mind, there is a Jewish problem. What do we do about the Jewish problem?
You, first of all, have to address it. First of all, Karl Marx wrote a piece called Zur Judenfrage on the Jewish issue. The Jewish problem came into existence over the course of the 19th century after Napoleon emancipated the Jews in France. In 1890, the Civiltà Cattolica, the official magazine of the Vatican, wrote a 3-part series on the Jewish problem or the Jewish question. Okay, there is a Jewish problem. There is a Jewish question. It is more urgent now than it was in 1890. It is much more serious now. We are on the brink of global nuclear war because of the Jewish problem. There's no question about it. And if we can't address the Jewish problem as a Jewish problem, if we always have to use circumlocutions, we are never going to solve this issue. This is a serious issue. We have to deal with it right now. We have to break what Balsman called the Jew taboo. We have to be able to talk about this. And that's why I'm grateful that you have allowed me to come on your program, because this is the solution. The first solution to the Jewish problem is acknowledging that it's there and talking about it. After the Pittsburgh shooting, I said, I have been saying for 10 years now, no one has the right to harm the Jew. And the ADL has been calling me an anti-Semite. I said they did everything within their power to suppress my ability to say that. And as a result, that guy in Pittsburgh probably didn't hear what I had to say. And he took a gun in and he gunned down 13 Jews. This is the problem when you suppress any type of discussion by bringing the hammer down and calling it anti-Semitism. So again, I want to say I'm grateful for you for allowing me to come on and discuss this issue openly.
I appreciate that. And by the way, I mentioned the ADL at the outset, but I also know that the ADL has strong liberal leanings, and there are many things I would differ with in their approach as well. And of course, everyone has the right to speak freely. What I want to say, and then we've got a quick break and we'll be right back, is that the rhetoric of the Jews, the Jewish problem, the broad brush statements that you're making are not part of a solution, but only exacerbate the problem, only lead to Jew hatred. And ultimately, as much as you could say we shouldn't be violent or harm people, it does lead to harm. We've seen it through the centuries. All right, we'll be right back with Dr. E. Michael Jones. I'm having a very candid discussion with Catholic scholar and author E. Michael Jones. Perhaps his book certainly his book that most relates to what we're talking about today and some of the very deep and serious differences we're having is his book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, somewhere around 1,200 pages long. In fact, a book I had quoted in one of my books about the power of music, where he was talking about communism and role of music in communism and even some Jewish involvement. And I quoted it and then read more and thought, oh, I really differ here. So I put in a caveat where I differed in the footnote because the book was about to come out. Dr. Jones, if folks want to go to a website of yours and find out more about your position, what's the best place to go?
Culturewars.com.
All right, culturewars.com. So again, I said at the outset that we'd have a very candid interaction and exchange, and we've done just that. So in your mind, since there is, quote, a Jewish problem, you say the first solution is to talk about it. And you've heard my pushback in terms of your talking points. But aside from all Jews becoming followers of Jesus, what's the solution to the, quote, Jewish problem in your eyes?
Logos.
Okay, but that's
first of all, there is a logos of action, which is called morality, which is called practical reason. Okay, this is the logos that is under assault. by Jews who promote pornography, who promote abortion, who promote gay marriage. These are three of the main political movements in my lifetime. Okay, you can't. Don't. I'm just. We don't tell me. Don't give me the sense of moral superiority when you're talking about murdering children, or when you're talking about having sodomy. Don't bring up tikkun olam. Okay, tikkun olam is your license to wreck my culture and destroy the moral order. I'm saying if you keep pressing this, there's going to be a bad reaction. I'm trying to say, take a deep breath, let's stop back, and let's start talking about it. And in a sense, I have to disagree with you. We cannot talk about it effectively unless we can use the term the Jews. It's not anti-Semitic to say that there is a group called the Jews. That's simply preposterous to say that. I don't want to get into invective here, but it is not anti-Semitic to say that there's a group called the Jews.
Right. Well, that's not anti-Semitic to say there's a group called the Jews unless we make false generalizations about that group. Like
Okay, well,
if I said the
how about
Catholic, what if I said the Catholics hate the Jews? Well, that would be a false statement. I've overgeneralized about the Catholics, and there are very few things I could say about the Catholics. Look, the Catholics in America are the bishops are pro sodomy. Well, you have a few that are corrupt, or the cardinals are. So you have to be specific. I often get questions on the air. What do the Jews believe about thus and such? And I say, well, what do the Christians believe about baptism? Well, which group of so immediately you have to subdivide. Listen, I absolutely am with you. And as a Jewish follower of Jesus, I hate the fact that influential Jews have been on the wrong side of major parts of the culture wars, and that influential Jews helped birth the horrors of communism, which brought so much bloodshed. I grieve over this, and I don't deny them or downplay them for a moment. At the same time, I'm going to address them rightly because I know hundreds of thousands, or actually million plus, traditional Jews that abhor those very same things that you and I abhor, while, quote, rejecting logos in your view. So, I mean, can you at least hear what I'm saying to say if we
Yes,
could be more specific, then we could more accurately address problems?
yes, but I am being specific. I'm saying the Jews. I'm saying there is a category that it does have meaning, and that it has meaning throughout human history, all the way from the Gospel of St. John, all the way from hoi judaioi up to the present, when Amy Dean says that the Jews are behind gay marriage. It has meaning. And I've tried to refine that meaning, by giving you my understanding of what's going on here in the program. And as I said, I'm grateful to have the opportunity.
Got it. All right. So, but just to be clear, then, all right, because you are a scholar, all right, and I respect your scholarship in the midst of our differences. When you say logos is the solution, are you saying Jesus, or can Jewish people be part of having a positive contribution to society, like the many Nobel Prize winners and Jewish philanthropists and Israelis that are on the front lines of helping in the midst of natural disasters around the world and things like that, or folks, Dennis Prager or David Horowitz or Ben Shapiro, can they have any positive contribution to the well-being of society without embracing Jesus as Messiah and Lord?
Yes, by embracing logos, and in particular by embracing the logos of the moral law. The moral law. In other words, it is your duty, and you've done it already, but I mean, basically, to call the other Jews onto the carpet when they say that gay marriage or abortion are part of tikkun olam and healing the world. This is an outrageous statement. It violates everyone's sense of morality, and it's got to stop, okay? Because if it doesn't stop, there's going to be a violent reaction, and I want to avoid a violent reaction. So yes, the first step is dialogue, which is what we're doing right now. Logos is speech, and then you move up the chain, and logos is acceptance of the moral law. We have to come to some type of consensus that there is a moral law and that everyone has to follow it. Everyone.
Right.
And
So,
by the moral law, I mean things like abortion and
yeah.
sodomy, and I forget what else we were talking about.
Right. Yeah. So abortion, pornography, homosexual activism, etc. Right. So obviously, I'm a target because I stand up. I'm all on all the hate lists because I stand out and stand up against those things. But then again, traditional Jews would as well, and traditional Jews would absolutely hold to the moral law and the importance of keeping the moral law, and that's a central part of study. And then, of course, if you know the origin of Tikkun Ha'olam and mysticism, it's the exact opposite of what liberal Jews would be putting forward, or leftist Jews. So yeah, I agree that's a bastardization and a misuse
Good,
of the term tikkun
good.
halam.
I,
No,
just, I
no
just like
question.
to I just like to mention my experience. I had, Jewish friends in graduate school at Temple University. It was basically Jews and Catholics at Temple, and one of my friends introduced me to her brother, my Jewish friend, her brother who is an Orthodox Jew, and we got together. She likes me, obviously. She likes her brother. She wants the two of us to talk. So I bring up abortion, and it's clear this man has no understanding. He says, "Well, abortion's okay as long as it's not Jews." Well, that's a kind of fundamental misunderstanding that's coming from the extreme other end of the spectrum. You know what I mean? He was obviously not a Trotsky. He was obviously an Orthodox Jew. And I'm saying that even among this group of people, there are distortions that have crept into the logos that impede this type of dialogue. But
Right,
that doesn't say that it makes it impossible.
right,
And you're right. I'm saying that what we have to do, if we could all agree on logos, okay, we would be making a tremendous step forward. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying you have to be baptized. I think every Jew should be baptized. But if we can start off by saying, we believe in logos, this is practical reason, this is the order of the universe, that would be a tremendous step in the right direction.
right. And what we can agree on then is God's moral law, as laid out in the Hebrew scriptures and is reinforced in the New Testament, but is also reinforced in traditional Judaism. So we can agree on that and start there. Which again, then I would say, okay, so the Jews that do affirm the moral law and its importance of it, and who find abhorrent, say the Jews in Israel who find abhorrent much of what happens in the modern state of Israel. You mentioned a group like Nitorei Karta. They're a very small group, but they represent traditional Jews who always opposed the modern state of Israel because they didn't want a secular state.
Right.
They felt that that would be harmful for many many reasons. And you even have many religious Jews in Israel today. They're not part of Nitorei Karta, but they also are opposed the modern state of Israel. And you'll find, by the way, you'll find no group of people more self-critical than Israel. I mean, in Israel, you've got the far left parties, you've got like Meretz, you've got groups like you have Israeli professors calling for the boycott of their own nation. So you got a very self-critical people. But the idea that there is like a false messianism to disprove Jesus, or all these Jews want to rebuild the temple to have their own Messiah, and I've seen quotes like that. It's so bogus. There was one guy with his Zehut party, and that was one of his big platforms, rebuild the temple. He didn't even get enough votes to get a single Knesset seat. But what I would just make this last appeal to you. We've got under 2 minutes, and I appreciate you willing to come on, and I'm happy to dialogue off the air, on the air, whatever the setting is. All I'm saying is the broad brush with which you paint and the broad statements you make are such that they encourage Jew hatred. They encourage demonization of Jews. I've seen the way things have played out with comedian Owen Benjamin. And then when I took issue with some things he said, the amount of stuff that came my way about these evil Jews, it was such we had to disable comments for a YouTube video, which we virtually never do. Only twice we've done in 1,600 videos. I'm just seeing the effect of it. So we've got a minute. You get the last word, but that's my appeal to you to reconsider your use of terms and rhetoric.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your advice, but I cannot not use the term the Jews. I simply cannot do it. And I'm saying once again that to say the term the Jews and then to state some type of characteristic like rebellion against Logos is not promoting hatred. It's a simple description of the fact. And if we can't describe the facts, we have no basis for discussion. Again, I'm saying because we could discuss the issues, that's a step in the right direction. Okay, but we have to be able to say what the issues are. And in order to do that, you have to use terms like the Jews. It's not anti-Semitic to say the Jews.
Right. So we agree it's not anti Semitic to say the Jews. We agree that Jews, like anybody else, can be subject to valid criticism and deserve valid criticism. My issue is when you say the Jews and then put out a blanket statement, which is inherently false or exaggerated, that's where the danger is. But, sir, I appreciate you coming on. Perhaps we can continue the dialogue in other settings. Again, culturewars.com is where you'll find material. The book we've been discussing, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. We're out of time. Dr. Jones, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.